to January's annual general meeting of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund. Everybody knows by now, I'm James Gamble and I'm the chair of Nottinghamshire Pension Fund. But I do wish to thank today, we've got Lucy that's come over from our actuary at Barnett, Waddingham, who's going to do a presentation later on today. So thank you, Lucy, for coming over. And of course, we have William Bourne, who's come over, who advises on the pension fund. I also wish to thank from last meeting, so that's December meeting, we had Aegon come over and they did a presentation. And I'd also like to thank LGPS Central, who came over in December when they did the presentation. A very quick announcement. I just want to congratulate the Pensions Committee because we have now made over £1 million in savings, and that's from reviewing and renegotiating investment management fees. And of course, I'd like to thank Head of Pensions Fund Investments, Tamsin Rabbits, for her work for doing that for us. So we've made over £1 million in savings. Thank you. Right, and now I'd just like to say to all elected members, officers, pensioner reps and trade union reps and advisors of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee, I extend you a very special thanks for coming over, and of course your contributions and perspectives, as always, are very welcome. Now, we are in a slightly different building today. We're in Oak House, so in Hucknall, but it's the same procedure. I'd just like to remind members that the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, so viewers can hear the presentation and questions for today's meeting. And I'd just like to remind everybody, right, so actually we're going to do a round robin, which is what I always like to do. So of course, I'm James Gamble, and we're going to start over to you, Dom, and we go around, and then if everybody can introduce themselves, that'd be grand. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dom Monaghan, Advanced Democratic Services Officer. Thank you.
I'm Councillor Faz Chowdhury. I'm the Vice Chair of the Pension Fund. Thank you.
Stephen Pearson, County Councillor for Bingham East Division.
Councillor Harry Owen, representing West Bridgeford West.
Roger Jackson, County Councillor for Southwell.
Stuart Matthews, County Councillor for Leek and Ruddington.
Councillor Jim Vernon, Carlton West.
County Councillor Bert Bingham for Worksop West.
Kieran Guilfoyle, Investments Officer in Tamsin's Pensions Investment Team.
Jo Toomey, Pension Fund Governance Officer.
Sarah Stevenson, Group Manager, Business Services Centre.
Lucy Byrne, Actuary.
Tamsin Rabbits, Head of Pension Fund Investments.
William Bourne, Independent Advisor.
Graham Chapman, Councillor City Council.
John Cockcroft, representing the GMB Trades Union.
Neil Timms, representing the pensioners.
Chris King, representing pensioners.
Councillor Andy Edivine from Rushcliffe Borough Council, I'm Borough Representative.
Thank you for including me. Darryl Paul, I'm a District Representative and I'm based in Bassett Law.
And then morning everyone, I'm Nigel Stevenson, I'm the County Council Section 151 Officer.
Ashley Booker, Senior Media Officer at Nottinghamshire County Council.
Lovely, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. Right, so as we all know, before we begin the meeting, I need to remind everybody that those members of the public that aren't present, but they may be upstairs, that any placards, banners, advertising materials and similar items are not permitted in any committee meeting and must be covered or removed. Failure to comply may result in that member of the public being asked to leave the meeting. Members of the public should remain seated during any debate and not do anything to endanger the health and safety of any person. Members of the public may record proceedings and report all public meetings. However, any person recording must not distract the good order of the meeting. And please, I'd like to remind everybody, just turn your mobile phones or any other electronic devices off or to silent. Thank you. Right, let's make a start on the agenda. This is a much smaller agenda because it's an AGM. And over to you, Dom. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Roger Jackson is substituting for Councillor Stuart Bestwick, who sends apologies under the category Other Reasons. We also have apologies from Councillor Barry Answer under the category Other Reasons, from Councillor John Clark under the category Other Reasons, and from Everton Lewis Gordon, Trade Union Rep, and Councillor Zafran Khan from Nottingham City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Dom. That's been noted. So, agenda item number 3, that's declarations of interest by members and officers. Does anybody have a declaration of interest in the meeting? No, that's fine. Thank you. Right, so agenda item number 4, that's the notes of the previous year's meeting, which was held on the 30th of January 2025. And I ask members to confirm the notes of the AGM held on 30th of January 2025. Just let they're noted. Don't need to be a vote on this. Thank you. Right, so we now go to agenda item number 5. That's over to you, Lucy, at Barnett Waddingham presentation. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. So I am Lucy Byrne. It's a pleasure to meet you all today. I'm one of the actuaries who looks after the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund, and I work for Barnett Waddingham. So today I'm just going to talk you through the 2025 actuarial valuation, which is currently underway, and hopefully answer any questions that you may have about the process in general. Please do feel free to raise your hand if you've got questions as you go along, just to make sure that there's nothing that needs explaining further. So please do raise your hand, and there will be opportunities for questions at the end as well. So this is a brief agenda. Next slide, please, Dom. Of what I'm going to talk about today. So ultimately, what is an actuarial valuation? So what is our purpose, really? The proposed assumptions that we've set in order to calculate the pensions liabilities, give a bit of an overview on the 2025 whole fund valuation result, and also briefly touch upon the funding strategy statement, which is ultimately a comprehensive document setting out our strategy for setting the contribution rates for the employers within the fund. Next slide, please, Dom. And again, fabulous. So what is the valuation? So the LGPS is a funded scheme. So this means that contributions are paid into the scheme by both members, employees, and also the employers. These contributions will be invested, and then ultimately that is the funds that are going to be available to pay the pensions to the members as and when they retire until the last pension ceases, which is either upon the member's death or the spouse if there is an attributable spouse pension. So one of the key outcomes of the valuation is understanding if we've currently set aside enough assets now to pay the pensions that have been promised to members to date, and that's what we call the funding position. So we'll look at the assets that we currently hold as a fund and for each of the individual employers notionally, and compare that to the cost or the value that we've placed on those benefits that have been accrued to date. So if we have more assets than we need, that's when we say there is a surplus. So we have more assets set aside now than we would need to pay the pensions that have been promised to the members. But if we don't have enough assets, that's when we say there is a deficit. So we will need to recover that deficit to ensure that those benefits will be fully funded by the time the members do take their pension. Next slide, please, Tom. So that's one part of the equation, but the other part is setting the contribution rates for each of the individual employers within the fund. So this is broken down into 2 elements. So we have the benefits that have been promised to the members up until the valuation date, but we also have the benefits that are going to build up in the future for the active members who are currently contributing to the pension fund. So we need to understand what the employers need to set aside now, which along with the investments will cover the benefits that are going to be accrued in the future for those active members. And that's what we call the primary rate. And it's set out as a percentage of the pensionable pay. So a percentage of the pensionable pay that member is earning over the year will be set aside by the employers to meet the cost of those benefits as and when they fall due and the member retires. We also have the secondary rate. So this is the element where we try and restore the funding position for the employer. So if the employer is in deficit and we need more contributions paid into the fund to be able to ensure there's enough benefits at the end, enough assets to pay the benefits when the member retires, we need to adjust the contribution rates to recover that deficit over an agreed period of time. So that's what we call the secondary rate. So for example, if the employer needs to pay £10,000 in order to get them there, we will spread that £10,000 over the agreed period. So then once that plan has finished, the employer should theoretically be in a fully funded position and we have enough assets set aside to meet the member's benefit payments when that member retires. So we add these together and that forms the total contribution rate, and that is what the employer will need to pay in order to meet the cost of the pensions that are building up in the future, but also restoring any potential deficit. And this will be set out in what we call the rates and adjustment certificate. So this is a formal documentation which sets out what an employer will need to pay for the period 1st of April 2026 to 31st of March 2029. When we set the total contribution rates, we also pay close attention to the stability objective. What we don't want is to award contributions that are going to be volatile to employers, because this will mean that they have struggle budgeting and understanding the volatility of the contribution rates that they're paying into the pension fund. So that's also a key consideration we take into account when setting the contributions. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions at this stage? No? Perfect. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the valuation project. It's a year-long project, really, but we do start ahead of the valuation date itself, where we met with the fund officers back in around November time in 2024 and did as much preparation as we could to get into a good position to be able to start valuing those members' benefits after the valuation date. So since the valuation date has happened, we've gathered all the employer information, the member data, and we valued each of the individual funding levels and contribution requirements for each of the individual employers within the fund, and also at whole fund level. And then we also drafted the funding strategy statement, the document I've previously mentioned, and that was launched for consultation with employers at the end of November 2025. And this consultation ran until January this year, so it's just recently closed. So now we're into January, and what are we doing? Well, we're ultimately taking on board all of the recommendations or feedback we've received as part of the FSS consultation and determining whether there's any slight changes we want to make to the strategy to make sure that it is clear as possible to employers and the key stakeholders. And so we'll be finalising that before we take that to committee for final approval. And we'll also be drafting and finalising the key documentation for the valuation, including the valuation report, which will summarise our key findings, but also the rates and adjustment certificate, which is the formal confirmation of what the employers will need to pay over the next 3 years. So this all has to be formally signed off by the 31st of March 2026 in line with statutory deadlines. And so over the next 3 months, we will be working towards getting all of that documentation ready. Next slide, please, Dom. So I've touched upon this a little bit before, but ultimately, what is the funding valuation? So you may hear me talk about liabilities, but that is ultimately the value that we've placed on the members' benefits that have been promised to date. So what do we actually need to hold now in order to meet these pension benefits in the future and these pension payments? Because we're expecting the investment returns to do a lot of the work for us, we don't need to hold the exact monetary amount of the pension at this time. We just need to work back to today's date, allowing for the investment returns that we are expecting to achieve on those contributions. So that's why we say at the present value of the liabilities at today's date. The assets, we hold the assets at whole fund level, and we only notionally assign them to each of the employers within the fund. So this will allow us to set the funding level for each of the individual employers or pools. But we also pay close attention to the actual long-term investment strategy. And this is what we use to determine a suitable expected return, long-term return on the fund's assets in order to understand how much we actually do need to set aside now. And then ultimately calculate those employer results. So the employers are either pooled, and what pooling means is that we group together similar employers. For example, we might have the academy pool or small scheduled bodies pool. with the idea that the assets and liabilities are grouped together. So every single employer within that funding pool will have the same funding level, will pay the same contribution rate. And the idea being that if we group them all together, they're less susceptible to potential volatilities in their funding level and the contribution rates, and will allow us to have long-term stability in both measures. If they're standalone, it's normally because they're a big enough employer in order to be able to deal with potential volatilities and be able to have a bit more of a stable funding level and contribution rate. We still do track these employers separately over time to ensure that we're setting suitable contribution rates for that group of employers, and that's what we do ultimately as part of the valuation. Next slide, please. So how do we go about valuing the members' benefit? So ultimately we gather a lot of data. So all of the members' data, which will set out all of the pensions that they've accrued to date, as well as their salary information for us to estimate what benefits they're going to build up in the future. We need to set a series of assumptions. So these can be broken down into two main groups. So we have a group of assumptions that we call the financial assumptions, and this helps us estimate the amount of the benefits. How are we expecting those benefits to grow over time? For example, what do we expect inflation to do over the next 30, 40 years? And then we also have the assumptions about the timing of those benefits. So when are we expecting those benefits to be paid? And that's what we call the demographic assumptions. So it could be to do with when we're expecting members to retire. Are we expecting them to retire early? When are we expecting them to leave active service? But most importantly, how long are we expecting to pay this pension for? And ultimately, how long are we expecting the members to live? So once we set those assumptions, we build an actuarial model where we calculate the value that we've placed on those benefits at the point of time of the valuation. And that helps us calculate the liability for each individual employer or pool within the fund. Next slide, please, Don. So that's the liability side. We also need to compare that to the value of the assets. So as I've mentioned before, no employer has their own assets. They're all notionally assigned based on the whole fund assets. But how we do this is we will take their notional assets that have been assigned either at the start of the contract, if it was after the last valuation date, or at the last valuation date. We allow for what the employer has paid into the fund, so the contributions that have been paid in by both the members and the employers. And we take off any benefits paid, so any pensions paid, lump sums, contribution and refunds, that sort of thing, and apply the investment return that the fund has achieved over the intervaluation period. And that ultimately gets us to the assets at the end. And that's what we will use to compare to the value that we've placed on the benefits, the liabilities, and determine the funding level for each of the individual employers or pools within the fund. Before I move on, any questions?
Yes, got a question, Councillor Darrell Paul. Thank you.
Looking at this, we've got local government review coming in. We're going to have a situation whereby people, I suspect, will be retiring early. We don't know that figure yet, and obviously they won't be contributing, but they will be increasing the liability to the fund. Has that been taken into consideration? Do we have a, in terms of projecting forward, how this might affect the fund?
And are you thinking in terms of redundancy or just general early retirement?
I was thinking that with the restructuring, there's an inevitability that will be certain posts and certain people that will decide to leave the organisation. So we need to take that into consideration. And obviously, some of those will be the higher earners, I suspect, which means that their contributions will be greater. It'll affect different districts in different ways, so that needs to be taken into consideration for individual liabilities and assessments. And I was wondering, at this stage, we don't know the outcome of that, but are we, because actuarial valuations are a long-term thing, the length of the pension, is that being taken into consideration?
Definitely, it's one of our main considerations. We will have our normal assumptions when it comes to early retirements, for example, and to take into account people taking early retirement. But it's one of our key considerations when setting the contribution rate. It is an unknown at this time, so we can't put a value on it because we don't know the number of potential redundancies or the number of members that would be retiring. But when we are setting the contribution rates, in particular, the level of contribution rate reduction we're willing to give, it was one of the main considerations to ensure that we're not going to see massive hikes in volatile contribution requirements in light of potential changes in membership in the intervaluation period. So it's not explicit, but we do take it into consideration when determining a suitable rate of contribution rate reduction. or the level of contribution rate to set.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Graham Chapman, thank you.
How do you determine the discount rate?
So the discount rate. So what we do is we take a best estimate return of the long-term investment strategy. So we will look at the strategy and the proportion of assets held in each asset class, and we look at what we expect that particular asset class to return over the next 20, 30 years. And then we calculate a weighted average of that. So on average, we expect the assets to perform, I think it was around 6.5% per annum over the next 30 years. And then we make an adjustment for expenses for the fund. So these are evenly shared amongst all of the employers within the fund. And this is based on us looking at the sort of what has been paid and the costs that the employers are having to meet over the last maybe 3, 6, 9 years, that sort of thing. And then we also make an adjustment for what we call sort of prudence. So we undertake some modelling, and we provide the fund with a range of options for the level of prudence that they would be willing to accept based on their own risk appetite. And so we make an adjustment from that best estimate return to end up with our prudent estimate for how we're expecting those investments to grow over time.
Is that negotiable?
It can be open to a conversation. Ultimately, it's a decision that is made by the fund and the committee. The fund makes a decision, it's delegated to the fund, and it can be a conversation. But what I would say is, as part of the valuation process, we've had a very comprehensive discussion talking about the suitability of the discount rate and the level of confidence they want to have when setting sort of the rate of return on those assets. And so it has been discussed quite thoroughly with the fund at this point.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not on us, it's up to Nigel to confirm. Yes, no, it's not just us. We never set the assumptions, we just advise around what the assumptions could be, and then ultimately it falls to Nigel. I'll let Nigel.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right to ask the question, Graham. Yeah, so there is a long conversation that takes place around all of the assumptions that are in there, including the returns on and the assets, as well as the prudence assumptions, taking into account all other legislative changes that we think may affect the fund, although we may not be able to quantify them absolutely in terms of what those effects are. But although it falls to me in terms of agreeing all of those assumptions, there are a number of colleagues, including William, our independent advisor, as part of that conversation in terms of challenge.
Thank you. And I think the two questions that we've had from Councillor Darrell Polk and Councillor Graham Chapman are really valid. And I know when I looked at the last YouTube playing of last year's, Councillor Graham Chapman asked a question then on the annual valuation. Also, we've got quite a few new members. We've got some members here. So we've got Roger Jackson, Councillor Roger Jackson, and some other members who've been here over previous years, so that they'll know all about the triennial valuation. But we know the importance of the discount rate, and we know the importance of assumptions. You've mentioned the prudence level, and Graham's mentioned about negotiations, Councillor Graham Chapman. When setting the valuation assumptions, how do you balance prudence with affordability for employers? And are you confident that the current basis that we're not being too cautious than necessary? Because as we're aware, if there's a higher discount rate and a different calculation, that's going to impact on the primary rate for employers' contributions, which will be much less. And that could, of course, impact on council budgets. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realise I turned off my mic. Sorry, thanks, Nigel. It is a very key consideration and a key point that's been raised. I think it's one of the key considerations when it comes to setting these assumptions. We do take that big holistic view. We don't just look at what is a suitable prudent assumption. We also look at what the impact would be on those contribution rates as well. And that does form part of the conversation with Nigel and the fund when it comes to determining the assumptions to set. When it comes to actually our modelling and the level of prudence we're adopting, we have stayed in line with what we achieved in 2022, and actually, even in times of regulatory uncertainty, the potential changes as a result of LGR, we are still comfortable that we have the right level of prudence within the fund. We have stayed stable, but actually our prudence adjustment has come down since 2022, from 1.4 to 1.3. So we have taken a bit, we have adjusted it a little bit. We have become a little bit more optimistic when it comes to that adjustment. We're just not comfortable going too far. Because like you say, if we do increase the discount rate by more, that's our expected long-term return on the assets. We're expecting those fund returns to achieve even greater, and that puts a lot more pressure on the funds to return. And what we don't want is if that discount rate or that expected rate of return to not be achieved, and then have the volatile funding contributions come in the future. So whilst we take a long-term view, we also need to consider potential short-term volatility. So we need to be cautiously optimistic. We are increasing our expected return on the asset, but we're not willing to go any further at this stage with the risk that contributions could become more volatile and therefore have to be increased in the future to offset potentially underperforming that investment return. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Have we got any more questions up to this point? Councillor Vaz-Chowdhury, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Lucy, coming down from your organisation. Yeah, I've got just one question to ask, if you can just summarise for us. This AGM, I'm looking at the funding level, 31st of December 2024, 100% to 97.5. What is the forecast for 2025 to 2026 funding reduced level? Do you have any answer?
Do I have any answer at this stage? So I can talk about later on in this presentation, can show where we've got to at 31st of March 2025, and then I can maybe answer that question at that point. I think that would be probably a better point to pick it up, but I will answer that as part of that part of the presentation, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I don't think we've got any more questions, so do you want to carry on with the presentation?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dom. Next section, please. You might need to go through just a couple of the slides. So we have briefly talked about this already, but just to summarise, the three main assumptions that we do look at from the point of view of the amounts that these benefits are going to grow by is the discount rate, which I like to refer to as our prudent expectation of future investment returns. So how are we expecting those contributions to grow over time to meet the members' pensions being paid? And that has increased since the last valuation. So we are slightly more optimistic when it comes to the level of returns that each of those asset classes can achieve. And we've also slightly reduced our prudence adjustment from 1.4 to 1.3%. So this ultimately means that the discount rate has increased, which means we're expecting the assets to do a bit more of the work. So employers can contribute less because we're going to get that greater return on those assets. We also have inflation. So the LGPS benefits for deferred and pensioner members will increase with uncapped inflation every year. So based on the September from the prior year. And our long-term expectation of inflation has come down, primarily driven by the fact that we've had those two peak years of inflation since 2022, and that was factored into our assumption last time. So now we're sort of over the hump with those two. Our average return over the next 30, 40 years has come down from 2.9 to 2.7%. So whilst the benefits are going to continue to grow and increase, and the cost is going to increase, they're increasing at a lower rate, which means the value placed on the liabilities at this point is lower. And then finally, the salary increase assumption. So for the active members, their benefits are split into two parts. We've got the benefits that were accrued before 31st of March 2014, and these benefits are still linked to the member's final salary. So when they come to retirement, their final benefit will be based on their service over that period multiplied by their final salary. So we need to make an assumption about how we're expecting that salary to grow over time, and that's where the salary increase assumption comes in. And so this is set relative to CPI, and it's set in the same way as it was set in 2022 at 1% above CPI inflation. And because CPI inflation's come down, our salary increase assumption has also come down, and that also places a lower value on the liabilities. So all in all, from the financial side of things, we are more optimistic compared to 2022, and all else being equal, our liabilities and the value placed on those liabilities would reduce. Next slide, please. So that's about the amount of benefits. We also need to think about the timing and, most importantly, mortality and how long these pensions are going to be paid for. So this is just a bit of a chart showing what's happened to life expectancy improvements since 1990. We have seen the majority of the time improvements across the board, and then we obviously had this significant drop around 2020. One guess for what that could be. So the COVID pandemic meant that life expectancies and improvements in life expectancies did take a bit of a hit. But we are now in a position where we're seeing improvements again. So since 2024, we are expecting future life expectancies to improve from their current calculated positions. And this is reflected in our analysis. So next slide, please, Dom. So as part of the valuation, we have a longevity team at Barnett Waddingham who undertook a comprehensive analysis of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund data for the 5 years prior to the valuation date to understand how their life expectancies actually compare to the overall population, and that helps us set the life expectancy assumption or the mortality assumptions at the valuation date. So depending on how you want to look at this, it's either good or bad news. So the members are living longer, which is great, but that also means that the cost of providing those benefits will be increased because we're paying the benefits for a much longer period of time. Well, not much longer, we are seeing modest improvements. So at most up to half a year more than we have sort of anticipated in the past. So all else being equal, this actually places higher value on those liabilities because we're paying those benefits for a longer period of time, and therefore would worsen the funding level, and in the same vein would increase the cost of providing those benefits from a primary rate point of view as well by around 0.4%. So next slide, please, Dom. So moving on to what's happened since 2022 and the valuation results at a whole fund level. So we've had extremely volatile times over the last 3 years. The investment returns have been pretty volatile, and actually they've come in a bit less than expected over the 3 years, which has created an increase to the cost. If the assets haven't performed as well as we wanted them to, that puts more pressure on the employers to offset the cost of providing those benefits to make sure we have enough money when it comes to those pensions being paid. As discussed previously, we've had a period of high inflation with 10.1% pension increases being awarded in 2023 and 6.7% in 2024. And that compares to our assumption of 2.9%. So every single time this pension increase is awarded, this is embedded into those benefits. We can't reduce that cost. That cost is there and built upon in future pension increases as well. And so this has increased the cost of providing those benefits and therefore would worsen the funding position as well. But it's not all doom and gloom. Like we said, the discount rate has improved. And so what this means is we're expecting going forward the investments to do more of the work for us. So the value of those liabilities has gone down. The discount rate doesn't affect the cost though. The cost of those benefits is still the same as a result of the discount rate, but the discount rate just allows us to understand which part of the levers need to be pulled. Do we need to contribute a bit more because our investment returns are going to be lower, or can we contribute a bit less because we expect them to be a bit stronger? And that's what's happened this valuation. We're expecting them to be a bit stronger this time, so we can afford to reduce contributions cautiously. So next slide, please, Dom. So what this means for 2025 is that we have seen a slight reduction in funding level, but ultimately it stayed relatively stable. So we've gone from a 100% funding position in 2022 to a 99% funding level in 2025. And on our next slide, which I'll talk through in a bit more detail, will show how that position has been reached. But as you can see on the right-hand side here, as I've previously discussed, we have had a period of extremely volatile investment returns, which has ranged from -1.8% to 8.5%. But this averages out around 3.2% over the last 3 years, and that compares to our discount rate or expected return of 4.7%. So because the investment returns have not achieved what we set in 2022, it just increases the cost that's been put onto the members and increase the liabilities in respect of those members as well. Okay, fabulous. Any questions. I think this would probably be a good point actually to say what's happened since 2025 to 2026. So I haven't done the calculations yet, but what I would say is we have had a period of relatively strong fund returns, Tamsin, since 1st of April 2025. So all else being equal, we'd expect maybe a modest improvement in the funding level compared to 2025, but wouldn't expect it to be far off. And with the way that we set our assumptions, our funding level is aimed to stay relatively stable to help aid the contribution requirements, but also to not have those fluctuations over time. And that's why we set our discount rate relative to the actual investment returns. So it kind of, everything sort of moves in tandem. So whilst we are seeing an improvement in the fund returns, we might expect then the liabilities to go up a little bit as well. So we will see an improvement, I'm sure, but maybe not a massive improvement in light of the change in investment returns. Having said that, I've not done any of the calculations, so I will heavily caveat that, but that's my expectation at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask a question about the longevity calculations that you made. Have you made an assumption that life expectancy is to increase again? Because we've had mixed life expectancy after post-pandemic. And can you tell us a bit more about what kind of scenarios you've used and when you've made that calculation on longevity assumptions? Thank you.
So when we've, I'm trying to think if I'm going to answer this in the correct way, so do correct me if I'm not answering what you're expecting. So ultimately we look at how the members have the number of deaths that have occurred over the 5 years and how that compares to the national average. And we make an assumption about then how different I guess they are to what we call the base table, which is the national table for life expectancy. And then when it comes to the improvements, we undertake some stress analysis on this. We obviously have covered the period of the valuation of the pandemic as well. So we do factor that into account when we look at the longevity of the members and the life expectancies and how that life expectancy is going to improve. And carry out a series of different calculations with a series of different models to anticipate all the different scenarios, if that makes sense. It's all summarised in a more granular report, but
yes, that's fine. Basically, I was just trying to find out if you'd use a cost increasing assumption using evidence and not opinion, but you've obviously used a number of scenarios. Yeah. That's all I was asking. Yes, because longevity will make a big impact on the calculations. Yeah, thank you. I've got a question from Councillor. He's got a different name tag, James Rawson.
Apologies. Oh Christ, I've got quite a voice.
I think I turned my mic off as well. I hadn't realised mine just came up.
What sort of timeframes are you looking to forward cast that line, if that makes sense, that are affecting this calculation? Is it 5 years, 10 years, infinity? potentially for pensions? I don't know.
I think we tend to, we take a long-term view, so we tend to look at sort of 20, 30 years. We're looking at the improvements in life expectancy sort of 20 years from now, so we could be looking at a 45-year-old and what their life expectancy would be when they retire at 65, for example. So we're sort of looking at a 20 to 30 year sort of time frame for those improvements.
And therefore, that time frame, 20 to 30 years, do you get anywhere back near, even after 20 to 30 years, back to the sort of shape of that curve early on?
I would have to look at the analysis to
It was
make sure,
distributing
for sure,
that graph, because I think that
from-
can really clearly answer that question.
Yeah, but I do feel like the general theme is that it's not going to go to that levels at this moment in time. It's definitely much more modest improvements in life expectancies compared to what we've seen in the past.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Clearly, myself and Councillor James Rawson have got similar ideas on this one. Over to you, Nigel, to answer.
Being a bit of an old hand in terms of the valuations, well before COVID, you could see a slowdown in the improvements. And at some point, there was a discussion around whether it actually peaked, and that was a stop. I think the COVID element, though, is just added to the data that they're able to analysis. So it would be interesting to see if we go back to the pre-COVID, as Lucy has identified, in terms of whether that slowdown just continues in terms of improving. So I'm interested to find out that the data is actually showing a modest thing, and that would fit with my understanding in terms of what the data is actually saying.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Darrell Poole.
Yeah, just a quickie. You can't have the graph going up forever because people aren't going to live indefinitely. So clearly, logic means that the longer people live, the less the increase will be in their life expectancy moving forward. So must be a given, surely.
And to be honest with you, that's the picture you were seeing before COVID. It was always, every time we ended up with the triangular valuation, there still seemed to be a slight uptick. Yeah, but not forever. Absolutely agree.
Thank you. A question now from Councillor Stuart Matthews.
My point is, what's the effect on inflation increase to age increase?
For the way
on assumptions and revenue needed for the pension pot.
Okay, so for mortality, you'd be looking at, if you live for maybe half a year longer, then it might increase the value of your liabilities by around 1.5%, and that reflects about a 0.4% increase in the contribution requirements. I would say in a similar way, so for a 1% increase in inflation, you could be looking at around 0.5%. Is that right? I'm trying to get my maths in my head. 0.1% increase might be a 0.5% increase in the cost of those benefits. But if you come back to me, I just need to think about the numbers in my head and give you that exact number when it comes to inflation.
So technically, either the employee or the council not to pay more contributions to keep up, all the investments will have to go up.
If your inflation assumption increases, the cost of providing those benefits will increase, and therefore you need to contribute more. So the LGPS works as a balance of cost. So the members the members' contributions are fixed. So what this means is that no matter what happens, the members don't have it doesn't influence the member contributions. The member contributions are set based on their contribution bands. So that doesn't happen. So if the cost of the benefits increase because inflation increases, people are living longer, that ultimately will fall onto the employer because they make up the cost of that difference. But in the same vein, if the cost of providing those benefits reduces and the contribution rates reduce, then the employers benefit from that reduction in contributions. It doesn't affect the member contribution rate. to provide that stability, if that makes sense. But yes, I can give you the exact numbers once I've thought them through in my head, but ultimately an increase in CPI inflation will increase the cost of providing those benefits, and therefore it would fall to the employers in that situation.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. You got a question, Councillor Bingham?
Yeah, I think it's been covered a little bit in the last few questions. I was going to raise at the start. Obviously, you've got these variables and volatility in them, and that you're looking at the correlation between them, which is what's being discussed. My point, going forward a couple of slides to where we finished off just now, is that I understand the long-term view we take in pension investments, but on the current valuation, we're doing the 3-year valuation, which starts at the end of COVID, when those variables were very volatile. It'd be interesting to see the year-on-year moving averages and forecasts, not now, but that would be very useful to our thinking. Thank you.
If we go forward a couple of slides, Dom, to where we were, and then the following slide here, this actually does show us get from 2022 to 2025. It's obviously not broken down in an annual basis. We would be able to provide that for you as well. We do have a sort of a funding tracker to allow you to see how we've changed from 2022 to 2025. But as you highlighted, it has been an extremely volatile 3 years. So whilst we have maintained that stability in the funding level, we have seen some massive shifts across the board. So if we look at the two really big red bars, I suggest, we've got the pension increase experience there of the 6.7% and the 10.1% pension increases that have been awarded, and that resulted in a loss of around 560 million for the fund, which is quite a large number. And then we also have the investment return, which resulted in a loss of around 269 million as well. But this has been offset by our future outlook. So our market expectations have improved quite a bit, and our financial assumptions have improved. So we're seeing sort of 500 million plus 296, so a 796 million improvement in light of being more optimistic about the future. So these have all there have been some massive movements here, but we've ultimately ended up in a relatively stable funding position 3 years down the line. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't do evaluation every year. We have to think about a 3-year time period at the very least, because we will naturally see these movements over time, and we don't want to sort of embed any sort of thinking or have that volatility in contribution rates being set. And we are having that long-term view. But it's also one of the main considerations we do set when we're thinking about contribution rate requirements for the next 3 years, because what we don't want to do is be overly optimistic and then be in a position where things don't go as expected over the next 3 years and over the short-term period, and then have to hike the contribution rates up again, because that doesn't help with budgetary constraints either. So it's trying to give as much of a balance as possible, understanding the balance of cost, what employers can afford and affordability, but also taking into account the potential short-term shocks we could be seeing over the next 3 years, for example, due to LGR or other issues, and also sort of investment markets are still quite volatile as well. So we just need to consider all of these things when setting the contributions, whilst looking at it at a long-term, from a long-term point of view as well. Does that help sort of show the movement?
It does, thank you. I can't read it very well from here, so I'm sure we'll be getting that information if it's not already in the pack.
Fabulous. Yes, if the slides haven't been shared, I assume we'll circulate them afterwards, so you can see those, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any more questions for Lucy? Okay, just before we finish, could you just give us an overview, please, on the funding strategy statement and what it's all about, and when that would be completed?
Of course. If you want to go forward a couple of slides. So this, I can just briefly show you the primary rates of the employer cost. Sorry, if you go to the previous slide there, Dom. Oh, there we go. Just to highlight that we are more optimistic about the future. So the cost for the employer on average has come down from about 19% to 16.6% at this valuation. So we are seeing that reduction. It's just a cautious reduction at this stage, given everything that I've talked about today. And so if you keep going a few slides there, Dom until we get to the funding strategy statement. So this is our strategy that sets out how we have calculated the contribution rates and how we've set the assumptions. It's a formal document that is required every year, every valuation, but it's something that's come into the forefront of everyone's mind this time, and because there's been new guidance published at the start of last year, which sets out exactly what we need to include in this document and to provide a bit more transparency to employers. So in particular, employers should be able to pick up this document and understand exactly where they stand. If they want to join the fund, how they get assigned their assets, how they have their contribution rate set, if they're to exit the fund, what do they need to pay in, how is it determined whether they need to pay any money into the fund or whether they get any money back from the fund upon exit, and also what it means for the valuation. So how is that employer having their contribution rate set, and how has the actuary set those contributions? So as part of the guidance, it's very clear we need to have a comprehensive consultation period. So the fund ran their consultation from November to January, and we gathered all of that feedback. The consultation closed last week, I think, or maybe the week before, relatively recently. So we're in the process now of gathering that feedback, working with the fund to determine whether there's anything that we want to refine in the strategy before it is published by the 31st of March 2026. And this will be taken to committee for formal approval before it is finalised as well. So that's where we are with the funding strategy statement. But the aim is to provide a bit more transparency to employers and show that every single employer that's in exactly the same situation has been treated exactly the same. We want to ensure fairness across the board, and we want transparency as well to those employers. And so you can pick up that document and know you're not being unfairly treated when it comes to setting your contribution rates or how you would exit the fund. But I'm sure we can follow up in due course about the feedback that's been received. But none of the feedback is in relation to the actual contribution rates that have been set. It's more to do with potentially just refining the wording here or there to aid transparency on a few different areas.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lucy. That's an excellent presentation, an overview of the work that you've been doing. There's no more questions on this one, so we're going to move down onto agenda item number 6, which is management and financial performance and financial management presentation, and that's going to be presented by Nigel Stevenson, Director of Finance, Infrastructure and Improvement. Over to you, Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And a lot of this information is will tie up with what you've already heard from Lucy anyway, so I'm grateful for Lucy's presentation. I get the standard presentation then in terms of the accounts with the net additions and withdrawals, the returns, which I know we'll have another presentation from Tamsin to go into greater detail in terms around investments. I'll touch on the management expenses, and then just a brief update on LGPS Central, and then just summarise at the end. Okay, thank you, Tom. As we go on to the pension fund key figures, the actual funding level, again, is as Lucy has mentioned, at the last actuarial valuation in 22-23, it was at 100%, and obviously we'll come on to the 99% when we go on to that report in due course. You'll see the net returns on investments has been volatile, again, as Lucy mentioned, and you'll see, therefore, the returns from the members and investments to the funding level, as I said. Obviously, the funding level, as Lucy mentioned, will change each year because of the volatility of the assets and liabilities, and again explains, as Lucy said, this is why we do the actual valuation every 3 years rather than annual. Moving on to the net additions then. This, again, just shows the volatility, again, as Lucy mentions, that we've had. The 21, 22 and 22, 23, where it was negative, is more to do with employers making significant contributions from members. And as we move on, as you can see, in 23, 24 and in future, you're likely to see more withdrawals. And moving on to that is the next slide, which is in a bit more detail in terms of those net additions from members, where you can see that contributions from members near about covers the benefits that we get from members. The net transfers, you can see in and out, are quite marginal. In future, we will have to rely on the investment income to cover the gap between the contributions and benefit payments. And of course, we will hear from Tamsin in a bit that will demonstrate the investment income is sufficient to support future payments. Thank you, Dom. Moving on into investment income, as I briefly mentioned there in terms of the contributions to it, you see overall they've been pretty static across the 5 years, but it does show the significant level. And as a consequence of that investment income, you'll know that there's no need for us to sell assets at this point for making contributions or paying benefits. Thank you. Again, as Lucy mentioned, in terms of the net return on investments, the volatility that is shown on this chart, you can see that there was high changes in values in 2020 to 22, which reflects the market recovery post-COVID. And less much of a return, as Lucy mentions, as we go into 24-25. Thank you, Dom. That's reflected in that chart overall, which shows the overall impact of the previous slides and information on the fund's net asset position, which is still growth over the period. Moving on then to investment management expenses, and I know colleagues at the Pensions Committee would have seen this chart previously. Thank you for Tamsin. You can see, obviously, because of our long-term relationships with fund managers, that we've been able to keep our fees low, and I'm grateful for the work that Tamsin has done to actually get them lower. It also shows investment management costs. As we become, the fund gets more diverse investments, you'll notice that we'll be moving into more expensive fund manager fees, although we are still starting from a very low position. You also have to remember that some of the fees in some of the funds that we're in, it's really difficult to identify those fees. So, and although we'll continue to look at the transparency element around that fees, you'll see that in future they may change as a consequence of more transparency than it actually being the costs going up. Thank you. Quick brief in terms of asset pooling. Again, we gave a presentation, I think, previously to the committee around where we were in terms of the asset pooling. So you know that the fund or the pool, LGPS Central, was created by 8 funds on the 1st of April 2018. A number of funds that are identified on this slide. Remember that Nottinghamshire is not invested in every single one of those funds. I think there's a couple that we're investing in. LGPS Central Pool also, as it is only 2018 when it was established, continues to develop new funds for us to invest in. And forever, the Pension Fund Committee will retain responsibility for the asset allocation. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll know that the Fit for the Future conversation that we've been having in terms of the draft bill that's driving the major change, which from April this year will move the responsibility for implementation of investments passing to the Pool Investment Fund. That means that LGPS Central will decide which investments to hold, but as I said, the Pension Fund Committee will still retain the responsibility for asset allocations. And then finally, in summary, the fund continues to have a positive net cash flow due to the investment income. Net assets increased in 24-25. LGPS Central will manage the fund's investments from April, and the Pension Fund Committee will continue to retain responsibility for setting the asset allocation. That was the standard. of the accounts that we've got. One bit before we finish that, you have to remember that the Pension Fund Committee, alongside the Nottinghamshire County Council, did have their accounts signed off in December. And again, one of the few local authorities to have their accounts signed off in the statutory deadline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nigel, for your presentation. Right, questions. First question was Councillor Roger Jackson. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Nigel, you mentioned in your presentation about the savings on the admin fees and charges from our investments, and the Chairman announced at the beginning that we've saved £1 million on that. Is that an annual saving? Does that money go back into the pensions budget, or does it go back into the council's budget? And are we sure now we are getting best value from our investments if we're cutting back on our the fees that we want to pay? Because a lot of fees rely on the actual result of the investment at the end of the year. So it would just be interesting to know whether we're not cutting Paul's St. Peter.
Thank you, Councillor Roger Jackson. I think Tamsin Rabbits is going to answer that one. Over to you, Tamsin.
Thank you. And you may need to correct me if I've missed some of the elements of your question. Some of those savings are temporary. Some of the conversations we have with managers are in response to particular issues or performance issues, and sometimes that gains us a temporary discount on fees. Some of them are ongoing. We always look for best value. Best value is not always the same as the cheapest. We try and avoid performance-related fees. A lot of our private assets have performance-related fees, and they do have the advantage that that means the investment manager's interests are aligned with the pension funds in that they're particularly motivated to deliver investment returns. But for our main mandates, we don't have performance-related fees. Sorry if I missed a bit.
If I might just add into where LGPS Central fits in, because the actual drive for the pooling of assets was actually to drive down management fees. Larger funds would be able to negotiate better fee rates with managers, and so LGPS Central will be claiming a lot of savings on the fees, but it is still, quite rightly, as you're alluding to, Roger, around its returns. That still is at our forefront of our minds in terms of what this is about. Yeah.
And Chairman, are the savings going back into the pensions budget or the council's budget?
This does go into the pensions. It's all to do with the pensions, yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Stuart Matthews.
A couple of questions, actually. First of all, I think you should be congratulated, the team, for putting £1 million of extra into the pension pot. That should be commended. And my second question is, have we factored in the and I'm going to say this word and you're not going to like it, the LGR effect and the result of, shall we say, restructuring of councils and employees and people of a certain age taking their pension early? And the final question is, I'm a great believer in that good salesmen, and let's face it, pension advisors or investors, you get good salesmen and good investors and bad investors. And I personally think the good ones should be more rewarded, who perform, and there should be shall we say, a catch net, where if they do perform and do well above the expected level, they do get an extra commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuart Matthews. Over to you, Nigel.
Yeah, I'll briefly touch on. I think Lucy already answered the question around the LGR one in terms of you can't factor in something you don't know about, although it's not explicit, although it is implicit in terms of the calculations around that, because of the uncertainty of the timing or of LGR. Yeah, in terms of investment in fees, again, the fund does does sort of like get the chance to question fund managers. Yep, and it's the fees and the negotiation with fees that's related to the work that the committee does in terms of its oversight of the fund managers.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor James Rawson.
Just a quick one in terms of fees, and I'm guessing it's better to look at it from a percentage basis. Do we do any comparisons as to the percentage fees we pay, given the size of our portfolio versus other portfolios of a similar size, and are we therefore comparable?
Over to you, William.
I use the kind of annual SF3 data, which is a data dump to MHCLG from all LGPS England and Wales funds. And Nottinghamshire is pretty well the cheapest fund in terms of investment fees. Very small caveat, it's getting better, but not everybody measures fees in exactly the same way. So the data is not entirely reliable, but we're certainly at the lower end.
Just on a quick additional question, if I may. I noticed you said we'll make comparisons to other LGPS funds. What about outside that, just similar sized funds?
I don't do data myself on that, but I have seen data from an organisation called Clearglass, which very strongly make the point that the LGPS get better deals than private sector investors.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor Birmingham.
It's just a point, really, again, I made it the point at the last meeting, and I think probably the one before, but going to Nigel's presentation with the changes that are due, it's the decisions, if you like, on investments are going to central pool, and we are the committee, we're still responsible, accountable. We have the fiduciary responsibility, so as long as everybody is aware of that, because our strategy is not binding, I believe, on the pool investment decisions.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to answer this?
Yeah. What's binding will be the asset allocation. Yeah, in terms of what funds are invested in will move to LGPS Central. Yeah, but then there are flavours in between in terms of that control, which obviously I think a working party, for the committee will have a discussion around later today.
I was going to say very much the same, that there's still a bit of a gap into how we hold the pool to account, but we can discuss that this afternoon at the working party.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I understand as well, when pooling with LGPS Central, with other pension funds joining, those investment funds will get larger, so they'll actually go into a different tier. And with a different tier, they should be able to get greater discounts. That's my understanding with pension pooling. Okay, thank you. Have we got any other questions for Nigel? Oh, yes, we do. Councillor Gray.
I just want to make a point about fees. We can get obsessed with them because we understand them and we can touch them and almost kick them because we've got a big complex system out there and it's one of the few things we can understand. So we spend an enormous amount of time on it. And what is very important is what value you get in relation to the fees you're paying. It's not the actual fees. And I think that message is getting home. You then move on to, do we do performance related? Well, the danger of performance related is you'll get a load of people in giving you a very quick fix injection, right? They then move on, right? And you're left with having invested in a bubble because, that's where you got your money. So, my view is that, not going for performance related pay fees is a good thing. My view is that we shouldn't obsess with the level of fees. We should be obsessing with the rate of return we get from our fees. And I'm not convinced yet we've got a method of actually judging what that rate of return is and what the performance is. And I don't mean in terms of performance-related fees. I'm talking about sort of longer term. Are we getting value for what we're paying? It's the rate of return that's important and not the actual level of fees. And Councillor, I can't read it, Jackson was absolutely right with this question at the beginning. That is my humble view. Actually, it's not that humble.
Thank you, Councillor Graham Chapman. Have we got any other questions? We've had some good questions so far. We've got another one. Councillor Stuart Matthews, over to you.
I think you misunderstood my point, what I said there, that the most important thing to me is that the pensioners get their pension at the time it's due. It's not about performance related. So I think you've took my point there completely wrong. If there's not enough paid in, you can't pay enough out. And that's the most important thing on pensions. That should be the end of the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuart Matthews. Right. Okay, we've got a question from Councillor Graham Chapman.
Thank you. You've been very tolerant. So we need to get to the stage where we're actually getting some proper hard idea about the rate of return on investment. And I'm not convinced that, and it may be me that's missed it, that we get that information. And it may well be that you're working on it, because I think I asked a question last time and you did say that's part of the agenda. Is that correct?
Over to you, Tamsin.
I would say that for most of our portfolio, you receive performance information on a quarterly basis, which comes to the committee every quarter. I think you have a point with regards to the smaller investments that the pension fund holds. Obviously, they are a much smaller part of the pension fund, but because those are a lot of individual investments, there's a delay in combining the performance of all of those into figures. So they're not available in time for the quarterly reporting. So maybe we should have an additional paper to look at the performance of those, maybe on an annual basis, to get that more detailed performance data to the committee.
Thank you, Tamsin. I think Councillor Graham Chapman, no, if you've got another question.
Tolerant, thank you. Will that give us a rate of return?
We get the rate of return for the pension fund.
Yeah.
Yes, well, that's my presentation that's coming next.
Right, okay. Lovely, excellent. I really, I love the debate that we're having here at the AGM of our Pensions Committee. And I think, was there a question with Councillor Darrell?
Yes,
Over to you, Darrell.
Comment, Chair. Thanks for that. We're talking about return, and we all know it, but we're not saying it. It's based on our risk profile. I mean, at the end of the day, the fees, the return, are based on what we want in terms of risk. We can get high returns if we decide we're going to take a high amount of risk. And in some of our portfolios, we have small amounts of money comparatively on a higher risk thing. So you can't consider one without looking at the other. And I think this is something that we're aware of, but it's something that we've not mentioned in this conversation. You know, if we want a higher return, then the only way we can do it is by increasing our risk.
Thank you, Councillor Darrell. Paul, is there any other questions on this item following Nigel's presentation? No, thank you. Right, so we now move to agenda item number 7, and that is investment performance, pensions and treasury management presentation. And that's going to be from our pension fund investment manager at Tamsin Rabbits. Over to you, Tamsin. Thank you.
It does keeps turning itself off, doesn't it? Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about the returns delivered by the fund's investments over the year to March 2025 and how these investments are managed. Next slide, please, Dom. The equities, property and bonds figures indicate the performance against the benchmark for our main investment mandates. Against longer term periods, the total fund return remains ahead of the assumed investment returns in the triennial valuation. At a fund level, the benchmark is partially linked to CPI, so comparative performance will struggle at times of high inflation, which is particularly the case over the 3 and 5 year periods. Next slide, please, Don. Each quarter, the Pension Fund Committee reviewed the performance of the fund and received reports from each of the main portfolio managers. During the year, the fund retained a relatively simple structure of management arrangements with 2 main equity portfolios, Core Index and Schroders, increasing holdings through LGPS Central as part of the LGPS pooling process, and mainly direct property managed by Aberdeen. The specialist portfolio holds a number of pooled funds in a variety of asset classes. Each holding is externally managed but overseen in-house. Each of the main managers has an individual benchmark against which their performance is measured. The fund's overall performance is then compared to its strategic benchmark and helps to inform decisions around the management arrangements. Next slide, please. The strategic benchmark is built up of high-level market indices for different asset classes. The benchmark is based on the agreed asset allocation. The fund's asset allocation is one of the key factors that the committee determines, and this is recognised as the biggest driver of returns. The fund then decides how each asset class should be managed. For example, segregated mandate or external managers, or on a passive or active basis. The performance of the main managers is reported to committee each quarter. And it's those decisions about each asset class which will change from April. Those decisions will be the responsibility of LGPS Central in future. A review of asset allocation took place during the year, which proposed some changes which have been approved and implemented during the current financial year. The figures above represent the current allocation, which was approved shortly before the end of the last March 25 year end. Next slide, please. This graph of performance of the passive core index is a good indication of how volatile the stock market can be, indicating that however good one year's results were, they may be significantly different the following year. Next slide, please. The Schroders portfolio is similarly volatile, but as an actively managed portfolio, performance will vary from the benchmark. Next slide, please. This graph clearly shows the impact of the lockdown restrictions to combat the spread of the COVID-19 virus in the last quarter of 1920 and the ongoing impacts through 2020 and the early part of 2021 on portfolio performance. And this was particularly for those consumer-facing industries. A recovery was experienced during 21-22, but increases in discount rates during 2022 impacted property investments, property valuations, and significantly affected performance for the year. Performance since then has shown significant recovery. Thank you. This slide will become more interesting and more indicative of real returns over time. Most holdings, including some private asset investments, have not been held for long enough for returns to be meaningful. Next slide, please. Where future investments are made through the LGPS asset pool, discussions over manager selection are made by the pool operator. But deciding on an appropriate investment strategy and asset allocation for the fund will still be done by the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee. And as we keep repeating, because it's so important, this is the most important factor in driving long-term investment returns. And so to summarise, the fund's net assets increased during 24-25. Total returns over the 5-year period remain ahead of the actuary's assumed return. And asset allocation is really important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamsin Rabbits, for your presentation. Do we have any questions for Tamsin at this time? I've got a question for Neil Timms. Over to you, Neil.
Just a quick one. In terms of equities, what is the benchmark? Where does it come from?
The benchmark for equities is 35% UK FTSE All Share.
Sorry. I mean the returns benchmark, not the asset allocation.
This is yeah, it's a combination of two indices. So it's 35% the UK FTSE All Share and 65% global equities. However, I would say that our actual global allocation is underweight the US compared to the index, and that does cause some of the difference between the benchmark and our actual performance.
Okay, thank you for the question, Neil Timms. Have we got any other questions for Tamsin? Oh, yes, we've got a question from Councillor Stephen Pearson. Over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
So, just to understand, if a particular asset class performs poorly over a period of time, I guess we would look to flex that as a proportion. within the parameters that are available. How long do we tend to give it? Because looking at some of those figures you show us, in some years an area performs ahead of the benchmark, in some areas it's behind. So at what point would you come back to us and say we need to look at flexing this?
I'd like to answer that one. There are two bits here. One is the asset allocation. Now, you may be asking if equities have done very well, and we've been underweight, how long do we wait for that? That's more a function of actually kind of what the future returns of the asset class are going forward. The other thing is, are we looking at, have we done, it's more about implementation. Have the managers we've chosen done better or worse than the benchmark? And it's always a difficult one, that. How long do you wait before changing? And my starting point is don't change, because any good manager will go through periods of poorer performance. And the risk is that you end up selling at the bottom and then buying at the top. So I start by saying don't change. If I want to change managers, I want to recommend changing managers, it's normally to do with a change of people or a change of process, i.e. they haven't done what they said they were going to do, and not so much performance.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stephen Pearson, for your question, and thank you, William, for answering that. Got a question from Neil Timms. Over to you, Neil.
It was just a quick one, and that is when we move our assets to central, won't there be enormous costs involved in terms of things like stamp duty and general this business that William's just brought up about the buying and selling of those investments?
Transition costs are definitely a significant concern, and they are one of the reasons why it's a bad idea to keep changing where you hold your investments a lot. I would say that there are things you can do to mitigate those costs, and where Central believes a transition is worthwhile, they will be looking to do that in a controlled way. And I would also like to reassure the committee that they are not suggesting that on the 1st of April they sell everything we've got and reinvest it. And for many of our investments, there isn't actually a way of sensibly doing that, and some of our holdings will just be held until maturity, and then it's just as cash comes back that will be invested in central funds. However, we do have people from LGPS Central joining us at the working party this afternoon, and I'm sure they will be pleased to explain their approach.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No. Well, thank you, Tamsin. But I've got a question from Councillor Baz Chowdhury.
It's no question. I'd just like to say thank you very much, Tasmin. You are a great manager for the pension fund in Nottinghamshire. And Sarah, Nigels, and all the committee, especially you, Chairman, thank you very much for the year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baz Chowdhury, for that. Do appreciate it. Excellent presentation. And thanks again, Tamsin and William, for fielding those questions. So we're now on to agenda item number 8, which is pensions administration, from the pensions administration team presentation. And that's going to be taken by Sarah Stevenson, our group manager for Business Services Centre. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's been another busy and challenging year for pensions administration. Scheme membership continues to grow. The fund continues to see significant levels of members seeking early release of benefits. As the administration team, we've also been working on a number of national projects. McLeod, this is now obviously moving towards the end of implementation, and we're working on the implementation of the McLeod remedy. We're also working on the National Pension Dashboard Programme, and I'm pleased to say that we are now connected to Civica, who are our chosen ISP, but we're continuing in our preparation for Go Live. We've also been working on a number of local projects, so automation and digitisation of our processes, looking at our employer portal, and also moving our system from the on-premise data centre to a hosted environment to support our cyber risk strategy going forward. And obviously, we have our ongoing review and update of the fund's risk register. Thank you, John. So as you can see from this slide, in all but one category, we have had an increasing number of members, so actives, deferreds, and our pensioners. So our fund membership now is in excess of 166,000 members. Thank you. From a year-end perspective, all our employers did submit their data, albeit a number missed the return deadline. The employer support and compliance team worked to support employers with their year-end submissions and data quality, and also do follow up with those employers that missed the deadline. I have a statutory requirement to issue annual benefit statements by the 31st of August each year. So we had significant volumes issued by that deadline, but we had some follow-ups as well. So this year we did issue the largest single number of benefit statements that we've done before. And those additional runs were where we had corrections of salary information from employers or the resolution of queries that were outstanding by that statutory deadline. We've heard a lot of information this morning about investments. Those investments have enabled us to pay out in the last financial year £244 million worth of pension benefits. So there we're actually then seeing how those investments are translating into the payments we make to our members. Thank you. We do measure our performance. You'll have seen this slide previously as I presented the admin performance report. So you will see in that far column where we've had an increase or a decrease on the previous year's performance. Some of those decreases are around, we're still awaiting data from employers. We may have had a peak in activity around things such as retirement, so we will move and deploy our resources. We always are looking to put pensions into payment as soon as possible once we've got all the relevant information. There are other things that affect our performance where we may be waiting for updated factors. So transfers in and out are currently being affected because obviously we're waiting for McLeod information from areas as well. Divorce settlements is an area where our performance has been slightly lower. Sometimes documentation that's coming to us from the courts has not been signed, so we can't put that into process until we've got that documentation signed. But we are constantly looking, obviously, at our performance. Thank you. In this particular final financial year, we have had a significant increase in the number of processes that we've completed. That is attributable to the fact that we've done a lot of work on automating our processes, but I'm expecting when we report on the 25-26 year that increase to be even greater because we now have a significant number of processes that are going through our automated route. Yep. That then has knocked on to the number of processes that we've completed within our key performance indicators as well. Thank you. So deaths, I think this, given the conversation that's already taken place around deaths, actually just shows you what our local experience has been of COVID, and it does mirror where you saw that dip from the slide that Lucy provided around 2020. You'll see there that's when we were getting a significant increase in the number of deaths being reported to the fund, but you'll see that that now has tailed off and is coming really back down to more pre-COVID levels. So the next thing is to really update you on our continued journey of transformation, digital development and new ways of working. Data. Data is absolutely key to everything we do. If we don't have the data, we can't process retirements. It's the responsibility not of only the fund, but also of individual members themselves and also scheme employers. We are required by the regulator to have an ongoing data improvement plan. Obviously, we're looking at data all the time. We're looking to improve that on a continuous basis. It is fundamental, and obviously quality of data feeds into the valuation as well. We are required to measure our data scores, so common data and scheme specific. So whilst common data has remained fairly static over the last couple of years, we have made some significant improvement in our scheme-specific data, but we've got to carry on and on this journey. So what are the sorts of things that we are doing to help improve our data? So our employer support and compliance team, they're undertaking individual audits with employers, so they're identifying where we've got issues with particular employers, whether the information they're providing to us for processing of retirements is regularly missing information, whether they don't meet our deadlines for year end. The automation processes also, when you look at that process, it runs end to end. It runs end to end when all the data is available. If it's got data missing as part of that process, then it will push that particular process out to a work tray. Again, our employer support and compliance team step in here. They're looking at what that data is that's missing. They're batching things up. They're working with scheme employers. We're getting that data back in. Mortality screening and address verification. So committee approved back in September a pilot project. So we now have completed the procurement with our partner Target. At the end of this week, we'll be doing our first data extraction from our pensions payroll, but also our deferred membership. And that will go through a full mortality screen. So that's checking all of those records against the National Death Register. Obviously, we will get a return because whilst there are services such as Tell Us Once, there are also people out there that do pass away where we don't get notified on as early a basis as possible, and actually sometimes it may be up to a couple of years before we are notified. So that mortality screening is going to be reading that National Death Register on a monthly basis. Obviously, we will bring information back to committee so you can understand what impact that's having. Also, addresses. People move house. They often will inform people such as utility companies, but they forget to inform the pension fund. We will send correspondence out, such as a benefit statement that will be returned to us by the post office. We mark up that record that that person's gone away, but this particular service here will start to do some checking of what addresses, is somebody living as stated at a particular address? Can we see there's activity taking place by that person at that address? So it will then enable us to make contact or re-establish that contact with our membership. Our customer service centre, again, as I've reported previously, has started to take pension calls. They are triaging those calls. If they're able to answer at the first point of contact, they do. If they don't, that has a handover process back into the pensions office, where then an experienced pensions officer will be in contact with the member. But that service is also doing data cleansing for us. So when that individual rings through to the customer service centre, part of the script there is enabling them to check things such as an address, an email, a mobile, to collect that information if it's missing, so that obviously we've got that and we're building up that record of those things such as mail, email and mobile phone numbers, so that when we come to be able to deploy the members portal, we've already got that information. Also working to review our data improvement plan with a view to bringing that back to committee in a couple of months. So again, that we are able to demonstrate to the regulator that we are working on an ongoing basis to improve that data. Thank you, John. So some idea of what our current status is of some of our transformation programmes. We do have a scheme employer hub out there. It's only used by a small number of employers at the moment. In that upgrade, it was identified that there was a security of vulnerability. Clearly, the fund holds a mass of data, therefore security is of vital importance. It has taken a substantial amount of time to address that issue. That is now resolved. So we're working up our plan to transition our existing scheme employers to the new hub and to then roll out to other employers. And what that will then start to give us is that electronic or that portal access between the fund and our employer for submission of information. The checks built into those submissions will start to mean that they aren't able to submit information until it's either all there or they have corrected it. As I said, a big piece of work over the last financial year has been working to automate a number of our processes. So our lever and our refund and our aggregation processes are live. We're working on deferred retirement quotes, and we've actually just started to work on our active retirement quotes as well. As I said previously, we've got a pilot mortality screening and address verification project underway. We are continuing to refine and work with the customer service centre to increase the number of calls that they can resolve at the first point of contact. Our hosting is scheduled to go live in March. And obviously we have another large project underway, which is to move our pensioners' payroll out of the council's SAP system and move that within a module on the pensions administration system. And as part of that, we will deploy a light touch members portal, which will allow our pensioners to access an online payslip, their P60, to also change their personal details, but that will also then give us the foundation to move to a deployment of that members portal out to deferred and active members in the future. Thanks, Don. So the year ahead looks equally as busy, both with business as usual, our national projects, our ongoing work on data improvement, further development around automation, and starting to open up portal access to drive self-service, and also Fit for the Future will have an impact on the administration service as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah Stevenson, for your comprehensive presentation. As always, do we have any questions from elected members or pensioner reps or trade union reps for Sarah? No questions. Thank you. So we now move over to item number 9, which is questions. And this is questions that we may have received from the public and other organisations, individuals. No questions have been received for this January's AGM of the Pension Committee. So therefore, I'm going to close the committee. I'd just like to thank all members for your participation. We've had some excellent questions and some debate. So just thank elected members, pensioner reps, trade union reps, officers, Lucy from Barnett, Waddingham for coming over today, and of course William Bourne, our independent advisor. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Just a quick reminder. We do have. Yeah. Just a quick reminder. We do have refreshments upstairs as well, which is in the big room. So do join us up there. And we do have a working group training session this afternoon. Thank you.
It's